like spark.
True.
Yeah, and also don't like wine.
You know, like wine. How would you know? You're other than like church.
Yeah, I went to Catholic church.
No, my parents let me take sips and stuff. It's all gross anyway.
All right, so I'll pull up the notes I sent out this morning. I want to knock out chapter 13 real quick, since I feel like if I don't cover this, then I've done you a disservice without knowledge. All right. So tomorrow what I'll do is I'm gonna like the first thing I just gotta get a handout. You don't need to type out anything. It's just stuff over like kind of like planes from like England, France, and Netherlands during this period. And then I got one more thing in notes. So tomorrow's the last thing in notes. Even for you guys who are not seniors, I'm going to start what we call Makeup May. So if you have any work you got to make up, most of you seniors are probably not going to be here on Thursday because the majority of you should be passing this class. I have to look on here. Now, with that being said, continue to turn stuff in. You need to turn stuff in. All right. Yesterday I sent out a worksheet, try to get that done. It's only like 10 points, but get it done. So ain't nothing else. All right. So yesterday the worksheet, yeah. Wrong.
So wait, if we're not passing, we got to come the whole day, or when the class is not passing?
That's a good question. That was the whole day.
Yeah. Wait, so is there any like penalty if you just skip the last 2 days?
I don't know. I don't know what the penalty is. Yeah.
Like I either got like one.
Rob, how about this? You do you. I mean, I won't say nothing. All right. I won't. But are you passing? You passing?
Yeah.
Okay, you should be passing. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know how that actually works. You know. But I don't know. Don't quote me now because I don't know.
I'm gonna go down there and tell them you told me to leave.
Yeah, no, don't say that. No. All right. So yesterday, like I said, was kind of introducing the kind of this chapter, and I flipped chapters 11 and 12, mainly because I feel that like 11 kind of transitions into 13 a little bit better because we talked about the Americas. All right, and so this is where we see this connection between Europe and the New World and stuff. So in chapter 12, when I was talking about the kind of Renaissance and Reformation, kind of overlapping the late Middle Ages, another event here is the Age of Exploration, which your standard kind of like textbook definition for that is such. Essentially, and again, the dates for these eras aren't always like set in stone. There's like ending dates here. Like the chapter goes from 1400 till or 1500 to about 1800. Right. The origins of this are in the later part of the 1400s. You can even say kind of like in the Industrial Revolution, that's kind of an extension of the Age of Exploration, because Europeans, as they were industrializing, needed raw materials that were found in places like in Africa and Asia, parts of the Americas and that. All right, so the Age of Exploration is kind of a European-centric kind of model. Usually, kind of they get the dates like in the late 1400s. All right. And so with this here, we see a lot of things that are kind of tied in with everything tends to be tied in with economics. All right. Europeans in particular with the kind of the Renaissance playing a role in essentially kind of spearheading a lot of like city-states to kind of financially kind of support some of these explorations. But Italy itself had basically kind of a monopoly on trade in the Mediterranean. All right, and so there's factors that are going to lead other countries, like today we'll talk about Spain and Portugal, to kind of like try to go out and initially find new routes, but essentially establish claims here. So the first one, like I said, is the securing trade route here. And so you can really this kind of starts to unfold during the High Middle Ages with the Crusades, right? One of the positive factors that you can get from the Crusades is that Europeans are going to be introduced to things like spices, like things that we take for granted, like pepper. Once Europeans are able to basically spice up their bland diets, there's no turning back. So Italian city-states like Venice and Genoa became pretty wealthy by transporting Crusader people like pilgrims to the Holy Land, and then bringing back with them other people that were coming back, but also goods. All right, and a lot of those goods found marketplaces and places, so like Italy. But the further you got outside of that, like particularly like the Iberian Peninsula, you would have more middlemen that were kind of getting involved in kind of trading these things. So as more middlemen kind of get involved, the price of these things go up. All right, so as for goods that eventually made their way to Portugal, for example, you'd be paying more than you would if you were in Italy. Also, too, 1453 is an important date because that's when Constantinople falls to the Ottoman Turks and becomes Istanbul. All right. The kind of traditional Silk Road trade route, particularly for Christians, became somewhat difficult. Christians, particularly from the Iberian Peninsula, because of the Reconquista. So initially, this is the idea to kind of secure new trade routes. What ends up happening is they make claims to these places. All right. Another factor is kind of coinciding with the use of new maritime technology. All right. So we start to see like new things like the caravel start to become a more popular ship, which has its kind of like history dating back to the Romans. It's basically the kind of sails on the ship. The use of triangular lantine sails and these kind of square sails will be used to kind of like running ahead of the wind. This was basically the kind of triangular ones are almost kind of serve as like wings to a certain extent. This is somewhat similar to how we talked about like with the dhows in the Swahili coast. Now, prior to the caravels, you had relatively like kind of the use of sails was basically you were depending completely on like prevailing winds and stuff like that. Also, too, prior to the European age of exploration, China had a bit of an age of exploration. All right. The kind of largest and kind of mostly used like kind of ships were these Chinese junkets. During the Ming Dynasty, there was an admiral by the name of Zheng He who had traveled like to the Swahili coast, brought a giraffe back to China. There was a book, it's about 15 years old now, called 1421 that claims that the Chinese actually landed in what is California, but never made a lasting claim there. It's debatable on whether that's true or not. So the Chinese, for whatever reason, turned inward. They probably would have been competing with the Europeans for in that kind of age of exploration here. But we also see from China the rudder start to develop as well as the magnetic compass. All right. So all this technology kind of coalesces with this kind of period in the late 1400s. This is an example of kind of a caravel. You see the square kind of like sails in the front, the kind of triangular ones in the back. This is from a museum in Lisbon, kind of showing one of the earliest kind of caravels. And then prior to the use of the magnetic compass, the kind of astrolabe, which had its origins in the Middle East, was a kind of primary tool used for navigation. And then the third factor is kind of the ends to justify the means to a certain extent, the spread of Christianity. Now, this in a certain case can be kind of like excusing some of the bad behavior that European kind of explorers engaged in. There's this idea that later was espoused called the white man's burden, which is racially insensitive and best racist at worst. The idea that the Europeans, because they're Christianized, were bringing civilization to people like those in Mexico or those in Africa. Keep in mind, a lot of these cultures had extensive civilization. Yeah,
It's May.
huh?
It's
May. That's what I told him.
I'm teaching. Yeah, I got one more day, and then after that, it's just for world history. Then it's makeup.
Oh,
May.
all right.
Then it's but government's makeup.
I was
May.
gonna start bringing one of these in the day for you.
Oh, thanks.
Why do you say her?
What? 2006. Yeah, thanks. Well, I'm good. Thank you. Appreciate that. So this concept, the white man's burden becomes something that like kind of justifies certain bad behavior, like genocide to a certain extent. All right. Now the first country to basically kind of jump off this age is Portugal, generally believed. All right. And if you look at a map, the Portuguese are the far western end of Western Europe. They're relatively for goods that are coming from the east, they're paying a high price. Like I said, after the fall of Constantinople, it becomes very difficult for goods to kind of get to Portugal that they need. So the Portuguese initially start to kind of like make claims like around like North Africa. There's a place called Ceuta, which is a real small enclave. Today it's controlled by Spain, but it's in Morocco, and it's kind of like the entry point for a lot of kind of Europeans into North Africa. And they laid claim to certain parts of what is called Western Sahara. The guy that's kind of credited with basically kind of like encouraging the age of exploration is John I, the King of Portugal's son, Henry, who's like the fourth son. So he's like fourth in line to become king. He's not going to become king, but he was on some of these early expeditions with his father and his brother. He set up a school, which is on navigation, basically kind of like, it was dealing with kind of map making, how to use the caravel, the astrolabe and stuff like that. So He sets up the school, and he's often referred to as Henry the Navigator after that. And so the earliest kind of explorers that kind of sail for Portugal are going to come from his school. So there's Henry. This is a monument in Lisbon, in Portugal, dedicated to all the explorers. And right there in the front, kind of standing up, is Henry holding a caravel. One of the kind of the first explorers that came out of the school that's going to basically kind of expand past kind of the known area that the Portuguese were aware of is Bartholomew Dias. Right. Now you got to keep in mind, there's this kind of misconception that like people like Dias and like Columbus and stuff like that, were trying to explain to people that the world is round. It was assumed that the world was round dating back to Aristotle. Anybody who had an intelligence would know that. Like today, though, there are people that would believe that the earth is flat, and so you can't convince some people. It's just what it is. So Dias and these guys are kind of like astronauts. They're going literally into the unknown. So while they weren't totally sure what was there was like the myths of like these kind of sea monsters and stuff like that. Generally, what they would do is they would try to stay along the coastline. All right. However, I'm going to show you this video here that at one point Dias was kind of forced to kind of like basically kind of go into open water. Eventually, he makes it all the way to the southern tip of Africa. This is basically named the Cape of Good Hope. Initially, Dias wanted to name it the Cape of Storms. All right, but this opens the opportunity for the Portuguese to get closer to that kind of goal of reaching Asia via the eastern route. All right, maritime route. So I'm gonna play this video from the
30 years after Constantinople, a ship heads into a storm off the coast of southern Africa on a journey that will open a new era of exploration. In command, Portuguese explorer Bartolomeu Dias. Wealthy nobleman, expert seaman, risk taker. Dias is heading into uncharted waters. Searching for a new route to India around the southern tip of Africa.
These boats were hard to navigate. Yeah, people got in ships and sailed across oceans. It's really extraordinary how many of those ships never came back.
Dias has been using the coast to navigate. But as the storm gets worse, his guide becomes his enemy.
You don't want to be near the shore because you don't want to get driven up on the rocks. You're getting blue water over the deck and things are breaking and, all hell's breaking loose. You're terrified. You are sure this is it. I mean, you're making your peace with God and hoping for the best.
Now, Dias faces a choice that will determine the future for all of us. Head out into uncharted waters. Or risk death on the rocks. Pioneer on a journey that will change the shape of the world. Caught in a storm off the coast of Africa. Searching for a new sea route to the east. Bartolomeu Dias has two options. Risk death on the rocks, or head out into the Atlantic Ocean and the unknown. He lowers the ship's square sails, puts his faith in an ancient Roman technology that will become the key to a new age of exploration. Triangular lateen sail.
The sail acts like a wing almost. It actually develops lift, much like an airplane's wing. And if you have a strong rudder, able to steer that ship towards the wind, it transmits all that energy into forward motion.
You can at least make a tiny bit of upwind headway maybe you can claw your way off those rocks and not wreck and smash and destroy your boat.
Diaz turns his ship and heads into the uncharted waters of the South Atlantic, risking everything if he can't find his way back to shore. Out of sight of land for 13 days. No idea what lies ahead. His maps are useless. Lost at sea. His fate now turns on a powerful force of nature beneath the wave. An ocean gyre, a vast circular current caused by prevailing winds working against the rotation of the earth, creating a conveyor belt of water, 4,000 times more powerful than the Mississippi River.
So if you're sitting calm in an ocean gyre, it feels like you're, a painted ship on a painted ocean. Nothing's happening. But what's really going on is you're covering ground, but the whole sea is moving in this arc.
The discovery of ocean gyres will revolutionize seafaring. Diaz has no idea of the forces that slingshot his ship from an empty ocean toward the southern tip of Africa.
He really had everything going for him. He had the prevailing winds with him, he had the current with him, and he was on a ride that he may not even have fully understood.
Diaz claims the land in the name of God and country. It will become known as the Cape of Good Hope. The key to a new sea route to the east, bypassing Constantinople. A direct passage to India. Within 50 years, it becomes one of the busiest shipping lanes in the world. 44,000 tons of goods shipped around the Cape each year, building new empires, new connections, and a new future. The race to profit from the riches of the East is on. October 12th, 1492. A date seared onto the hard drive of humanity. Spanish sailors discover land, leading them an Italian, Christopher Columbus. Maverick, hustler, with his own dream to find a shortcut to the east. His plan to sail west to China. He calculates the journey from Spain will take him just 21 days. He underestimates the distance by 7,000 miles.
What's striking about this is that any educated person at the time would know that Columbus was wrong.
Undaunted, convinced he's right, Columbus has been all over Europe, begging for support for his journey. Spanish monarchs, Ferdinand and Isabella, throw some money his way. Barely enough to fund the expedition.
It's kind of the way that a wealthy person might bet $100 on poker, without much expectation, but you could afford it.
After 5 weeks at sea, close to starvation, thousands of miles from his target, he reaches land, which he believes is Japan. In fact, it's the Bahamas, off the coast of a vast new world. The Americans. Two worlds, isolated from each other for 10,000 years.
It's not only a huge event in history, but it's a huge event in the history of life.
The Bahamas are home to the Taino people.
These people, for the most part, by European standards, very tall, very healthy, very good looking, living in a state of abundance.
Columbus records their first encounter.
The people kept calling to us and giving thanks to God, as if we'd come from heaven. I presented them with some red caps and beads. They were much delighted and became wonderfully attached to us.
Living in a different ecosystem for thousands of years, the people of the Americas have no immunity to a deadly threat. Disease.
Europeans are sort of swimming in this bacterial and viral soup that was utterly unlike anything over there.
First contact with an invisible killer that will one day change the destiny of the new world. But Columbus is on a search for treasure.
I kept my eyes open and tried to find if there was any gold. Then I saw some of them had a little piece hanging from a hole in their nose. I gathered that by going further, I'd find a king who possessed in great quantities of gold.
Columbus returns to Spain a hero. His journeys open the floodgates.
Right. So this is Diaz's kind of trajectory, right? So and again, like you guys be like, mass drafts and trusts, I hit you with the Portuguese to keep it real. And then after Diaz, another Portuguese explorer basically kind of follows the same route, extends it a little bit further. He reaches India. The ultimate goal there was to reach India and China eventually for the Portuguese. So this essentially kind of cuts out the middleman, if you will, for the Portuguese who have a direct route to spices and such, and then they use this as kind of a jump off point to get to Southeast Asia and that. Like I said, he's the first European to reach India by sea, is usually the kind of theory there. Alexander the Great had been in India. There was a story of maybe a Roman settlement in India during the kind of Roman Empire there. And then the Portuguese start to lay claims to parts of Africa. Like in West Africa, they lay claim to a place called Angola. In the eastern part of Africa, they lay claim to Mozambique. Both countries, which are kind of like across one another on the continent in southern Africa, remain in Portuguese control until 1975. Da Gama was one of the first Europeans and his men to arrive on the Swahili coast. On the Swahili coast, they're kind of like thieves, they're like pirates. They're out of rations and things of that nature, so they kind of have to kind of rob and some kind of like Swahili merchant ships and that. Eventually, they make it to India. Gao, like Mozambique and Angola, remains in Portuguese possession until 1975 as well. And then while the Portuguese are trying to find a kind of an eastern route to Asia, their neighbors on the Iberian Peninsula are looking to a western route. All right. And unlike his, Spain is just kind of like newly unified. This is right around the time of the Reconquista I talked about in chapter 10. The Portuguese kind of look at exploration as an extension of kind of Portuguese, like kind of like identity and nationalism. The Spanish are willing to kind of outsource this. And obviously the most famous kind of explorer that sailed for the Spanish crown was the Italian Christopher Columbus. Columbus is from Genoa. Like the video said, he's kind of like a hustler. Him and his brother were selling this idea. The idea that there's a western route to reach China. Him and his brother, actually, they met with the King of Portugal. The Portuguese turned him down. There was belief that they actually had a meeting set up with Henry VII in England to test that out. That never happened, but then they finally convinced the young Isabel and Ferdinand to basically bankroll his exploration. Like I said, discovering the New World, discover is kind of in parentheses there because there was already people there, the Tano, the Carib. When he ends up landing in what is essentially the Bahamas, claims this island eventually for Spain, calls it San Salvador, named after Jesus, the Savior. All right, like I said, initially he thought he was in Japan, and comes to find out after a while there that he has reached an entirely new continent that Europeans were unaware of. All right, so there's the famous portrait of Columbus, which we don't necessarily know if that's in him. His 3 caravels, the Nina, the Pinta, the Santa Maria, their jump-off point was Sevilla in Spain. This is him claiming San Salvador for his Spanish crown. And he made all in all 4 trips. After his 3rd trip, he became the governor in Hispaniola, which is Dominican Republic and Haiti. Unfortunately for him and his brother, they were sent back to Spain after that 3rd trip as governor on corruption charges and cruelty towards the Spanish colonizers there, not the native populations. All right, Spanish colonizers. They were found not guilty. And then they were able to kind of generate enough money to make another trip, which they just basically kind of mapped out to kind of part of Central America. This is his tomb. They believe in Sevilla Cathedral. The cathedral there in Sevilla. The 4 statues there that are holding his tomb represent the states of Aragon, Castile, Navarre, and Leon. But there's a church in the Dominican Republic in Santo Domingo that claims to have his remains. All right. Columbus is, as of kind of lately, is kind of a divisive figure. All right, like Columbus Day, October 12th, was to commemorate his landing in San Salvador. Was kind of tied in within the early part of the 20th century with kind of Italian kind of like heritage in that. Now more and more places are getting away from Columbus Day. They'll refer to it as Indigenous Peoples Day, if you will. All right, and Columbus, for the most part, like things like Columbia, District of Columbia, are named after him. Columbus, obviously, but this part of the world is not named after him. It's named after this guy, another Italian who sailed for the Spanish, a guy named Amerigo Vespucci. Vespucci was from Florence. Now, his expedition was mainly kind of mapped out the northern coastline of South America, like what is now Colombia, Venezuela, that area. But the reason it's named after him is because the first map that was printed, and this happened to be printed in Germany in 1507, that had the New World on it, referred to this as America. I mean, region as it is. And so that's where it's kind of named after, mainly because his expedition was relatively young. It's American Vespucci. All right. Also, too, this is the age of the. I know we're running out of time. I'm just going to knock this out. This is the age of the conquistador. Last chapter, I talked about Cortez, who defeated the Aztec. Pizarro, who defeated the Inca before them, was Balboa. Balboa is considered the first one to kind of reach the Pacific Ocean through Panama. 1513. This is about like 8 years before Cortez defeats the Aztecs. However, Balboa, like Columbus, was the governor of the region, was brought up on corruption charges. Pizarro made a name for himself capturing Balboa. In San Diego, there's a park called Balboa Park, which is named after him, and then the currency in Panama is named after him. Rocky Balboa, Rocky Balboa. Yeah. Keep on moving. I'm going to skip this video here. And so, at one point, the papacy was concerned that these 2 countries, Portugal and Spain, that their claims were kind of crossing over on one another. Like where one claim began, one claim ended. In the 1490s, the papacy got involved relatively early here by determining like the kind of a line of longitude. Anything to the east of that would belong to Portugal. Anything to the west of that belonged to Spain. It was shifted over time. This is the Treaty of Tordesillas. Yeah, what's up?
So I know, like, obviously people in Brazil speak Portuguese.
Yeah.
But how come they call it Brazil instead of just Sam?
It's named after the Brazil wood, which was Carvalho, the guy who discovered it, named it after the type of wood that was there. That's why it's named after. Yeah, and Brazil today is the largest Portuguese-speaking country in the world. And that is because of the Treaty of Tordesillas. Everything to the west of that was basically, and before this was like, even before the fall of the Aztecs and stuff like that, would be claimed for Spain. That's why the majority of countries in Latin America speak
So like Bogota and stuff like that is just straight Spanish.
Yeah, and you have different dialects, obviously,
Yeah.
right? You know, so this was tweaked over time, but this is the reason why the linguistics, for the most part, in Latin America are what they are. All right, and then the last of the kind of explorers that we kind of mentioned here is a Portuguese explorer who's sailing for Spain, and that's Magellan. All right, so in the 1520s, Magellan led an expedition, I think 3 or 4 caravels. They claim that Magellan is the first person to sail around the world. He didn't make it. He died in the Philippines. What was left of his crew made it back to Spain. And with them, they brought things like nutmeg and cinnamon and all that stuff. Right? The first GPS system was named after Magellan, the Strait of Magellan. So like I said, tomorrow I'll talk about some of the positive and negative aspects of kind of like European colonization. I'll give you a handout on French planes, Dutch planes, and Nope. Yeah.
You're real.
One more day. One more day. We're out. But you got to sit here.
What?
I don't know if it's a kid thing or a fat. Oh,
What? Greg?
Oh, Amerigo Vespucci.
I said, bro.
Oh, you never heard that from?
Let's see.
They like eat it.
There you go.
I probably got
Yeah. I was just trying to see.
Come to school tomorrow?
Yeah, no problem.
Seniors are used at this time. Seniors are used at this time.
One more day.
Can we stop the recording?
Oh, yes, thank you.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Never mind.
So there you go. There you go right there. Yeah,
Oh.
that's it. Oh, and then they make, there's always this